Many people regard you as a personification of Ubuntu. What do you understand Ubuntu to be?
In the old days when we were young, a traveler through a country would stop at a village and he didn't have to ask for food or for water. Once he stops, the people give him food, entertain him. That is one aspect of Ubuntu, but it will have various aspects. Ubuntu does not mean that people should not enrich themselves. The question, therefore, is, are you going to do so in order to enable the community around you to be able to improve? These are the important things in life. And if one can do that, you have done something very important which will be appreciated.
The Open Source Report on the 19th of August, 2018, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We've been a bit tardy in our presentations here. Our attempt is to present these reports at least bi-monthly. Unfortunately, sometimes we fall a bit short of the old proverbial yardstick, or the meter stick, whichever one you are looking at. But open source being a very important part, and a much more important part of the global fabric, we'll say, because it is a global endeavor. Software, hardware, we'll look at both in this broadcast. We'll also look at other attempts by people in Silicon Valley in the U.S. to do, quote-unquote, a self-policing of themselves. Now, where this comes in is particularly in the social media, the big dinosaurs, whatever, the Facebooks, the Twitters of the world. And also we'd include in this the internet providers like Comcast, etc. That we had net neutrality, and now the idea of moving net neutrality off and some self-policing. Self-policing is nothing new, period. But firstly, we'll go to the kernel as we do always, and then we'll return to Silicon Valley in a minute or two. The Linux kernel is at 4.18.3. That is the latest stable version, and the long term is at 4.65. I believe the latest Slackware version, we use the Slackware distribution, is in fact 4.1.4.65, or perhaps it's 0.64. But nonetheless, the latest Slackware kernel is constantly being updated, and of course the mainline kernel now is 4.18 is the mainline kernel. And for people that use the latest editions of the kernel, of course, they can use the patches. There are always patches available, and you simply patch your kernel and not have to use the tarball unless you are obviously in an experimental stage and you have decided that you're going to move to the latest kernel and you want to get rid of some of the old redundancies around. But you can do that anyway when you're installing, so that's not a big problem there. Patching will work, but we do recommend that particularly people in experimental positions that if they are patching, and that's basically what we are doing here with the Slackware edition that we use, the experimental edition of Slackware. Now there is a regular Slackware edition out there, and there's also the current, they call it. And we're using the current, and basically what current does is it eliminates the old kernel and installs the newest kernel. And effectively, that would be what you would be doing, and appreciative to developers at Slackware that allow this to be done by using the latest scripts. That way we don't have to do it ourselves. In the old days, this was something that we did. We would either use the tarball as they're doing, or a patch to update the latest kernel. And the reason was, at that time, the kernel was very, very small. It was not as large, obviously, as it is today. So it was a totally different situation. In fact, when Slackware came out, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 disks. These were the 1.5 disks, and then we migrated when the CD-ROM came along to the CD-ROM, and later to the DVD, and a set of more than one DVD to get the entire Slackware edition up there. So it is a little bit different when you were using a current, not the upgrading of the current, but the actual current that we're using, a current version. We can get it on what is the 4.5 gigabyte DVD if we're doing that. But because of the automated process, that does save many things. So let's move on with this. We'll move back now to Silicon Valley, and then we'll come back. We'll start with open source hardware after Silicon Valley. Now, Silicon Valley is very interesting, and what we've been doing here at WBRN Radio is integrating at bostonred.org. We've been integrating our broadcasts somewhat because of where they are. The political broadcasts of Boston Red, because of Facebook and Twitter, more particular Facebook and the various machinations floating around Facebook in terms of privacy, and all of these Twitter, and of course people are aware of the national administration. DJ Trump, the president in the U.S., uses Twitter as his communications platform. Thus, you have a little different situation there, is how he is regulated as opposed to how you are regulated on Twitter. And this is the heart of the matter, where we get into their terms of usage. Now, when the EU adopted new privacy laws, then some of these sites went blank, and others were forced to come in compliance with the EU. And because you're dealing with a globalized internet, obviously, the EU mandates come in very, very quickly, and then you have mandates from other countries, period. So thus these usage terms have to be adopted. And this is the reason we decided to use this article in the Washington Post to just illustrate a little bit of the history. This is on the perspective here. Silicon Valley's attempt to self-police are anti-democratic, but they're not new, is the title of the article, and it points to, this is by Grant Wayhoff. He's writing on the 17th of August. The technologists are the technocrats. They're found a big picture of Howard Scott here, and a little bit of the history here. At first glance, look to any other 4th of July parade in a faded Kodachrome photo. Kodachrome came from Kodak. It was an early invention there for younger people there, of the Kodak Film Company. That was before we had digital film. Anyway, the uniform marches, handing out pamphlets, yin yang emblem in adoring banners, the fleet of identical gray automobile driving in slow procession operation. Golden Gate was the name of a 1948 plan amongst followers of a potential movement known as Technocracy Inc. to converge on the San Francisco Bay Area. These self-described technocrats gathered from around the country to educate the public in their central belief that politicians lack the ability to effectively manage complexities of modern world, and that the public should delegate decision-making instead to a small group of technological experts. Now, this is a little bit different here. Some of the technocrats are more fanciful proposals, including a 16-hour work week, equal incomes for all in the form of energy certificates, and the unification of North and South American nations into a technica of America. But the technocrats, iconic, its militaristic marches, insignias and uniforms and salutes wasn't about to win hearts soon after a defeat of fascism in Europe. The 1948 parade through San Francisco, Palo Alto, Santa Clara, and San Jose was one of the final public displays of this obscure techno utopianism that was soon to fizzle out. The technocrats packed up their cars and headed home after the parade to what would soon be called Silicon Valley. And this goes way back. I was unaware of this movement, and I thought we'd throw it in here. Therefore, after years of dormancy, the technocrats' ethos appears to have reemerged as a dominant response to concerns as diverse as fake news, data privacy, smartphone addiction, as public grievances mount against a few tech companies determining how we connect with and understand the world around us. And this is a little bit different here, and concrete proposals for action are coming from these companies themselves, rather than from lawmakers. Now in Europe, that is a little bit different. In the absence of functional regulatory apparatus, in the U.S., Silicon Valley is stepping in to police itself, as if restoring trust in the public sphere were as any other schedule and maintenance, and we know about those. The Technocracy Inc. Promoted a philosophy that required treating the public as passive users rather than active citizens. So far, the solutions put forward by the tech industry have taken a similar approach as a nation tries to understand what has become a democratic consensus in the early age of increasing fragmentation. The anti-democratic approach is precisely the opposite of what we need. Politicians, for their part, have been vocal about tech industry overreaching in the wake of revelations of Cambridge Analytica, Facebook data sharing. And this is where Facebook is a private operation that people share their data and hope that they have some privacy left. But it is a commercial venture based upon ads. We've noted lately that on YouTube, if you're watching some movie on YouTube, there's more and more commercials that are coming. And also the idea of tracking people on Facebook that are not on Facebook. They can continue to track people. So thus, Firefox came up with the Firefox container, and we do support that idea of the container. We've talked about that in other broadcasts. So this is a very, very up-to-date and a very important situation. Now we go to the the EU's General Data Protection Regulations recently caused countless sites with poor user protection to go dark across Europe. The legislation took 6 years to come to fruition. Under President Barack Obama, the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights was also proposed. That was in 2012. Suffered attacks on all sides and never left the drawing board. Most recently, the April Facebook hearings on Capitol Hill, long forgotten. There's a history of hearings being on Capitol Hill. We're not talking about the McCarthy hearings of ages gone by, but of recent years, as being nothing but pro forma. It is unlikely that it will get traction in dysfunctional Congress, especially as the politicians joke that they can understand only half of what they hear during the tech hearings. Well, that is not unusual. The end user, so-called end user, us, for the most part, if they go to Facebook, they just basically like a technologist that I know. This woman is involved in virtual technology. Recently found a long-lost brother on Facebook. So people look at the functionality of it, and at least in America, people tend not to be as concerned about privacy. They just take it, well, if we go to Facebook and there's Facebook. Facebook is not charging us. They're pushing ads to us. Now, this is in a media class that I was taking. So these people aspire to be one day at the Facebooks, at least an ad agency, if they can't make it to Facebook. Or Silicon Valley. So there are other organizations out here, and Center for Humane Technology to reverse the digital attention crisis. The San Francisco-based nonprofit Common Sense Media has been airing a public service announcement, the truth about tech. Even Facebook has been willing to humble itself, its modified news feed, which had not been there in the first place. So you get digital incentives from the Apples and the Googles of the world. And there's something called that they now offer called digital well-being in Android and let's see, screen time in iOS. That is Apple's addition there. So you have all of these various things coming up. Casey Schwartz wrote in the New York Times, apparently we now need our phones to save us from our phones. And that is very important that these mobile phones have become the center not only of young people's lives, but people in their 40s, 50s, and the baby boomers like myself. So this is where it's a very interesting situation, and it goes back to the Technocracy Inc. That was founded by Howard Scott, and follows proudly promoted as the technological fix for the technocrats of all social problems. We're simply waiting for the right design solution. That's a typical engineer's situation. And in many governments around the world, technocrats actually run the governments. And here we have for hire politicians. Let me finish this article up. I don't want to get too much into it, but just to highlight that it is the antithesis of the open source movement, that is the self-regulation. Open source in itself under the various public agreements out there from the Open Source Foundation in Boston have laid out what open source actually is. The ability to use software and to add to it and then put it back into the public domain, period. Now, there are other agreements out there, the general purpose agreement, other agreements that people use from the Apache Foundation, etc. So depending on which agreements you are working under. There's a lot of emphasis in the corporate world, the Red Hats of the world, the Microsofts of the world, that put some of their software into the public domain or into the open source domain. And Microsoft's recent purchase of the GitHub operation there is a different situation. Some people obviously are working at other sites to put their code. So again, we see this self-policing situation coming on. The technological fixes, such as tweeting the newsfeed algorithm, cannot replace regulations and critical conversation about technology and culture. And that's one of the things we are trying to do here. We are not, we do better than simply counting on the expertise of technocrats and other absentee or absence of users. Anyway, so this is a big situation, and it's good that the Post actually put this out so people could at least look at it and start the conversation. That was our purpose of doing it here. But nonetheless, to open source hardware. And let's see, the World Maker Fair in New York, that'll be in 2018, 1 month, 3 days. To get to it, I'd not heard of it before. Maker Pro News, should your startup go open source or more? And various other things here, the anatomy of road jam or wireless car hack. We'll touch on a few of these, and we'll put a link to the site with Linux and Creative Commons, the $9 chip computer reveres its open source details. Well, let's see which one we'll look at first here. We obviously can't look at all of these, but Google awards is $600,000 for 3D printed prosthetics, and this is for people that lose their arms. In the world of 3D here, just looking at some of the articles featured in this particular thing. Should you back a Kickstarter if the team's last project failed? A lot of questions here, and we won't answer all of these questions. Open source chemistry, Autodeck shares a formula for 3DP resin. I'm not sure. This is in the 3D printing situation. So there are all kinds of things going on here. And we'll just choose one here, the anatomy of road jam wireless car hack. I don't know what it is, but anyway, we go. We'll just see what it is. Anyway, it has been on the internet lately. If you've been on the internet lately, you've likely seen a storm of news of Sandy Karma's device that can intercept and store keyless entry codes for cars and garages. Bill your own $50 using Tirzy 3.1 and a couple of radios. The Rock Jam device is said to allow its users unfettered access to your automobile or garage via stolen electronic codes. The concept is fairly simple. The device tricks you into giving functional code for your car or garage by making it appear as though the first click of the remote simply doesn't work, and by then clicking again you're giving it two functional codes. Then that can then sacrifice one code to unlocking your car, and keeps you from thinking of the fact that you have been hacked. So kind of interesting here. If you want more details about it, this was a presentation at DebCom, and you can download the presentation slides from DebCon. So far, he hasn't released the code to the GitHub account. Well, anyway, this is Sammy Karmakar. Has a history of publishing very interesting security projects. Probably the best known was a MySpace worm, which made him the most popular person on MySpace. I guess MySpace is no longer in a space. He had also released plans to hack older garage doors that use fixed codes, as you can see below. Anyway, this fellow here with the codes and the little project there. So we'll just go back over here. I thought we just mentioned it. It looked, like something, I suppose, you would want to do. Whoops. But there are actually much better ideas out here than this. We just kind of saw it on the front page here, and we would go to it. I guess we won't make the Arduino tour this time around, but this is we're actually promoting the magazine here. Go to the latest. This is at the MEC magazine. See what we can find. The 3D part, I suppose, is one big part of many of these types of projects that they have. And we'll link this up so we can kind of get an idea from Arduino on Dave Jones over at the Electronic Engineers blog does a lot of work with Arduino and the Raspberry Pi, etc. Period. Yeah, just looking to see if we can find drawing ellipse and calculating scales, quickly casting. This is some of the stuff that they put out here. We'll just link this. We won't go through how to do this. Getting into building a complete laboratory, we won't get obviously into that. But some of the things that they recommend here, 3D printing is becoming very, very big here. The Maker Conference, I think we talked a little bit about that. This one's actually in Singapore, but there is one in New York that is coming up. Let's see if I can get it up here and we'll move on. But we saw this as one of the, I suppose, more interesting, more wanting to talk about devices here. And kind of, we got into the garage door. I don't know, the LED-based sign. A lot of these little projects here are just learning projects that people get into. And the idea is to learn from the projects and then apply that particular cleaning PCV with acetone. Well, more of the 3D painting type stuff here. Anyway, we'll get out of this and get back to open source hardware where we started out here, we hope. One would not imagine that you could get trapped in this and literally never get back. But anyway, this will do it for open source here. At least that part of the open source hardware operation there. Let me just try one more item here as we are in the hardware. There's incidentally a logo for open source hardware that can appear, and many people, as we sort of go through here, do my typing correctly here. This excuse me. We have went to opensource.com many times and talked about open source hardware, and just see if we can find our previous site that we were at there. Now, this was the open source hardware, the original page we wanted to find, and we got stuck on this wireless car hack, and that's kind of one of the silly things out there that come about with Linux and the Creative Commons, the $9 chip. That is one of the little projects that we were going to talk about here. So we're finally back. A lot of this, I guess, is built around 3D printing, and we'll do this and we'll leave this. The $9 chip computer reveals its open source details. Now, this is the next thing company open source project. We've been wondering exactly how the open source chip, the $9 computer, is turning out. And looking at the launch of the chip, this is from the Oakland-based Next Thing company. Made big waves back a few months ago. I think we talked about it here, and Dave Jones had it on his show. It's a 1 gig ARM processor and 120 megabytes of RAM, 4 gigs of nano storage, Wi-Fi, and also Bluetooth included with this one. And the CEO there shared more details about their board, and we were impressed when we heard the chip is licensed under the Creative Commons share-alike situation there. The next company is joining the Linux Foundation, and the chip is getting even more interesting than just a low-cost board. It's noteworthy today that the chip runs on the 4.2 Linux kernel, and we're finally getting to where we were trying to get to. This is absolutely the most current version of the Linux kernel and comes with the latest and greatest features. Embedded systems running Linux do not use the latest kernel. And I think we talked about this, particularly we were talking about the Android smartphones and which kernels they were using. The kernel is downloaded and patched with software which enables the board to boot it. This will not be the case with the chip. This is and I don't want to try to pronounce his name. He says his team are pushing towards maintaining all the chip code. The fancy way of saying that they are working on getting their code for the chip into the main branch of a Linux kernel. And that's a very good idea there for them to do. And in addition to announcing the chip, it's currently running with 4.2. It unveiled a software development kit. Thanks to the way that the structure, the ship dates for the chip, the first 1,000 chip boards were headed to kernel developers. When the kernel developers tier is simply a name, is a compliment. Many of these backers are in fact hardcore Linux kernel hackers. So we'll attach this. I won't get into all of it here, but noting that the chip is there, the chip company is there, and the SDK is now there, release of that version, and U-boot. This is getting into more than we thought. Anyway, this is at MEC, and we will put this on. Let's move on here finally. This is from Linux.com. Again, the Linux kernel 4.18 keeps things solid and secure. Now, this was published on a Sunday. Let me just make sure I get my dates here. This is the 13th of August at Linux.com. This is from Linus Torvalds. We don't hear much from him now. He published this, the code of the kernel 4.18 on Sunday, 1 week later than expected. This has been a rocky release. And it's still Android's fault. You see Android systems lack TMPFs, the temporary file system you usually are hanging off of your temp directly in the regular Linux system. Anyway, Android allocates a chunk of memory called Ashman that does the same thing. However, change introduced to Ashman in 4.18 made the open source version of Android crash. Unfortunately, all this time came to the light a week before. This came to light week before the final release of 4.18 was due. 9 patches later, and the problem is still not totally resolved. So Linus decided to roll back the whole thing and wait for another week for things to calm down, which he always does. In other news, the kernel is becoming slimmer and more toned, and is actually 100,000 lines lighter than its predecessor, the 4.17. It's worth remembering that 4.17 had already shed 500,000 lines of code and was lighter than the 4X series as more obsolete code gets ditched. And that is the beauty of the Linux open source operation, that we do in fact get rid of things that do not work, period. And the whole idea of the Linux operating system, say as opposed to the Windows operation, even on the Windows 10 and whatever else they come up with, there still is some integration there of the older operating systems going back to XP when it was a peer-to-peer. Supposedly on the Windows 7, when Microsoft ditched that, but not totally. So some of those things are still around and causing all kinds of problems. Forward-thinking developers have been working on a new kernel, time-space structure, and they will help avoid the 2038 problem hitting 32-bit systems. If you haven't heard of this it's similar to the 2000 problem, 38 problem. I don't know how many of us will be around in 2030. That's 20 years out. Anyway, there's the 2000 bug. It didn't appear. The unpatched machines will, I think, we back in the 1900s. This was very, very similar to what happened before. So we'll put this out there for you as we finish this, but this is a 32-bit ARM structure. Has gained fixes for spectrum variants, and I believe we someplace that some of Intel's processors have flaws in them, and some of the other processors out there. Doesn't affect the AMD process. We don't have it here, but anyway, we'll put this on. And let me see, where are we going here? Distro week. We'll look at some of these. We usually do. See which ones are out here that are noteworthy. We won't do Nomad. Let's see what we're going here. Debian team has become very good at finding bugs and potential problems. With discovery of issues is good. There's let's see here. Oh, this is Open SUSE. Extends there are various editions here, and this is Debian. They found something, and Open SUSE team is extending the file life distribution. This is a 42.3. I don't know how many people are using Open SUSE, but we just mentioned it here, and a lot of people still use Debian out there, and it still comes up. Everyone hasn't migrated to Ubuntu. There are many of these around, and they all continue to be, as they say, appear. Let me just go back here and see what has appeared here. They won't do quirky. We usually look at the site to see what has come about here. Sparky Linux, I don't know, a new development, a snapshot project. Sparky Linux 5.5. Oh, it's a testing branch. I had not heard of them before. But here you will find it that probably no one else has looked at it before. Ubuntu announced the availability of a new point release for distribution, 16.04. That's a long-term branch, and a 16.04 04.5, along with its community edition featuring updated packages, etc. In the past, we used Ubuntu probably, 10 years ago, I believe it was, maybe a little less than 10 years ago. We used it and had some clients that used it. But there were some pitfalls in it at that time, and of course we remained with Slackware. But the Ubuntu server defaults to installing, okay. The GA kernel, however, you may select the HWE kernel. Okay, well, anyway, this is Ubuntu server. Ubuntu server has gotten to be more popular since IBM certified it at one time. Kept up with it here. IP fire, at 2.31 core. This is another distribution here for firewalls, which offers a range of security tools and designs easy to set up. Well, anything I've been having to set up chains would be very productive. The distribution was released from the old long-term supported kernel. This was the old to the new 4.14.50. Well, that's okay. The updates enable migration against meltdown and on some architectures, the Intel-based platforms updated the microcode of the CPU when the system boots up. So look at that. And also for ARM, they're doing some things for ARM. ARM has been appearing more and more recently in many systems out there. Now, this is a phone system we use. Seeing it here is FreeCX. A phone system is a specialist Durban-based Linux edition designed to run a computer unified communications platform. The FreeCX client, including the distribution, will also be installed separately on most hardware as well as in the cloud. It provides a complete open standard-based IP PBX and phone system, which works with the popular. Now, this is the slip trunks and IP phones. It will automatically configure all supported peripherals, and it will come with a client for Windows, iOS and X. I get a little carried away, and Android. The ISO image includes a minimal system with a web server, PostX, SQL base, IP chains, firewall, secure shell. We're going to have to get this system here. Sometimes you find things. Originally, their system was set up a little bit differently, and exactly where we come with this. Anyway, we'll look at it and see exactly where it is going here. We have used their system before, and the idea that they were using Debian. At one time, their system was set up for the Windows environment, and that was basically what you had going on there. And the image, the standard Debian installer. Some things have been removed here in their system, and we'll highlight this one since we have used it before. It is very good to use for some setups. Anyway, we'll leave them and on to the Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation, the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, launches the Academy's Software Foundation. Yeah. And this in itself is an interesting development here. This is August the 10th. The Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Science and the Linux Foundation launched the Academy of Science Foundation to provide a neutral forum for open source developers in the motion picture and a broader media industry. This is a much welcomed situation here. And the goals are listed here. Some of the partners in this particular situation: Autodeck, Blue Sky Studios, Cisco has gotten this, DreamWorks Animation, Epic Games, the Google Cloud, Intel, Walt Disney Studios, Vita Digital at Premier level, and Foundry and Slide FX. So Autodeck is in it. Autodeck's been around a very long time. For those that have been around with it there, they used to make the Autodeck, which was for engineers. Autodeck understands and appreciates the diversity of our media and entertainment customers, and they moved into this. It used to be we had engineering clients that used Autodeck to design things. That's primarily what it was used for there. And now they have an open source Autodeck, director of open source there, Guy Martin. Blue Sky Studio is thrilled to be part of it, I suppose. And Cisco has been increasingly open sourcing some of their products strictly because of their deficiencies, we'll call them, in the worldwide Netgear market and the coming of these humongous data centers. So they moved more from a hardware solution to a software solution. That's kind of interesting. When the whole dynamic of the IT business started, it started with IBM. IBM was selling hardware, so they gave away the software as open source. It didn't really matter. They didn't care. And then when that switched, the emphasis on software, the Autodecks of the world and the Ciscos of the world. Autodeck was selling software. Cisco was selling hardware. And, of course, there was always some firmware embedded software there, but that was not the emphasis. So now they're all moving to open source. And DreamWorks, I don't know much about DreamWorks. I was pleased to be a founding premier member. So, DreamWorks Animation, I'm not sure what they are open sourcing out to people. And many people have heard of Epic Games. Is committed to providing a new generation of real-time technology for film and TV. We'll see what they open source out there for game development. I started out as a game developer. Of course, at that time we were using assembler. Anyway, the Google Cloud is excited to be a premier member. I imagine they are. And Intel Corporation is also in this to try to get some of their processes into the open source sphere. One of the very interesting things, Intel processors versus we're an AMD shop, had been an AMD shop. AMD was much better for handling graphics than the Intel processors at one time, and they also had some of the fastest processors around. We still get their stuff, and we still use more or less AMD processors. The Disney Studios and their animation studios there, the Industrial Lightweight Magic, Pixar, etc. are in this. So there are a lot of people getting into this space. We don't know at this point in time exactly what is in the space. I mean, what software will be provided, but they are starting to come with it. We had a program where we talked about some of the things out there that were involved in our more open sourcey situation there. But the phone is very interesting, the PBX phone. It is a good PBX system. but it was on Windows at one time and not on Linux. So interesting that. We'll have to look into that particular one and see where it is. We don't have it here. And what else do we have? Well, we'll go to our friend, Mr. Cribbs, the former reporter from the Washington Post. He does security. We usually always check him out in our presentations here and see what his latest emphasis is on. Indiana Bank hit for 13.5 million cyber heist. Or Indian Bank, sorry about that, not Indiana Bank. I thought this was, let me just make sure and check on the date on this item here. Oh, this is August the 12th. The FBI, of course, has warned banks about measures ATM cashers scam here. It says one of the FBI put out an alert on Friday, August the 10th. The criminals who hacked into the Poise Indian-based bank executed their two-prong heist, followed by sending co-companions to fan out and withdraw a total of $11.5 million from ATMs in 28 countries. So this is internationalized here, hanging up on mobile in the name of security. As entrepreneurs and virtual currency investors is suing AT&T for $224 million, claiming that the wireless provider was negligent when it failed to prevent thieves from hijacking his mobile account and stealing millions of dollars in cryptocurrencies. Now that's a very interesting lawsuit there. The two claims came in a lawsuit filed this week in Los Angeles. Michael Turpin, who co-founded the first Agile inventor group for Bitcoin. It was in 2013. He alleges that the crooks stole almost $24 million worth of cryptocurrency after fraudulently entering a SIM swipe on his mobile phone account at AT&T. That was in 2018. The SIM card is a tiny device there that in all mobile phones, customers can legitimately request a SIM swipe when they exiting a SIM card has been existing one has been damaged, and when they are switching to a different phone that requires a SIM card of another size. So the old SIM card trick here, target a new SIM card and a mobile phone that the attacker controls. Unauthorized SIM swipes often are perpetrated by fraudsters who have already stolen or phished a target password, as many banks and online services rely upon text messages to send users a one-time card code that is needed to be entered in addition to a password for online authentication. Very interesting here how this happens. I'll have to put this one up because this is a very important one with the old SIM card here. Turpin's claim An investigation by AT&T into the 2018 breach found that employees at AT&T store in Norwalk, California, somehow executed the SIM swipe on his account without having to enter extra security pins, and AT&T knew or should have known that the employees could bypass its customer security measures. So very important with the SIM card there and with mobile phones, etc. Adobe and Microsoft. This is a Patch Tuesday, August 2018 edition. They released security updates. Adobe plugged 5 holes in its Flash player, and Microsoft pushed 17 updates to fix at least 50 vulnerabilities in Windows and other software, including the zero-day flaws. They're still working on that one. According to security firm for the Internet Explorer, for those that still use Internet Explorer, I won't even get into that one because that's suicidal. It also patched variants of Mental Spectrum and Foreshadow anyway. So these are some of the things that they put out there. This is just for anyone that is still lurking on one of those systems. And what else did they have here? I think that's basically all that Windows-based shortcuts ending in link extensions. Anyway, fixed a bug that patched hack there. So these are some things that Microsoft, Adobe Flash has been more or less eliminated from most instances. We have one Windows system, I think one running Windows 7, that occasionally there is an Adobe Flash update, but very few sites use Flash anymore. Flash has pretty much bit the dust, as was a 80s term there. And on smartphones, you do have some Flash, but less Flash now than there was at one time. So there is some modernization here. But when it comes to the SIM card, that is one of the things that happens when you switch phones and say you need a different size SIM card you're switching to. Anyway, this will, let me check on our time here. Go back to the recording server. And let's see, where are we? Roaming along as usual. Anyway, this will do it for the open source report on the 19th of August 2018. For those of us at Cranston Software, who is always our sponsor for this, and WBRN Radio is broadcasting it. We will appear on iHeart Radio as we normally do. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitter. We're on Stitcher. And all those can be accessed, as most people, via their mobile device, a smartphone. And we can be downloaded also at Spreaker. So there are a number of ways of finding us. And we're also on the so-called smart speakers, Alexa, etc. there, Google, and you name it. And I don't know if we made it to Spotify yet. We haven't quite made it there, but some of the other programs at WBRN have, in fact, made it to Spotify. Oh, boy. We have ran a bit over. Anyway, we'll talk to you soon. This is MA at Cranston Software. Have a good week. And the rest of your summer. Hopefully you're not somewhere where there is a heat wave going on.